Greetings everyone. Today I want to talk about a location that has irked me ever since 2017. A mystery that was set up in Breath of the Wild and as of yet still remains unsolved, despite all the additional content we've gotten since then. I guess you could say it's a personal pet peeve of mine, so let's talk about Mekar Island. Just north of Hyrule Castle, sandwiched between the Great Hyrule Forest and the Eldor foothills, Mekar Island is designed to stick out from its surroundings. A small, suspicious-looking rock formation jutting out from the waters that wrap around the neighboring forest, catching the eye of any passerby exploring these parts. In terms of its size and shape, the island is only about 40 feet across, and characterized by its circular shape and a lone withered tree, which is positioned pretty much dead center, giving it a symmetrical, almost artificial look. There's a somewhat unnatural feel to it all, like the island just doesn't quite belong, which, as stated before, was likely a deliberate design choice meant to draw people in from afar. It's basically a beacon that screams hidden secret or buried treasure, which is why it was all the more surprising to learn that in reality, the island holds little to no significance. It plays no role in the story, there's no quests related to it, no shrine present, no high-value treasure like an armor set, not even a Korok seed, the one thing you would expect to find here given its proximity to the forest. It's as if the island was purposely designed to be a disappointment, like the developers are playing a joke on you. It draws you in from afar with its mysterious silhouette, only to offer nothing of substance. In fact, it's so unremarkable that no one in-game ever even acknowledges it, and I mean that literally. There's not a single piece of dialogue or item description or quest log that mentions Mekar Island by name, or even alludes to its existence. Not in Breath of the Wild or in Tears of the Kingdom, which is unlike many other mystery locations, most of which do at least get a passing mention somewhere or from someone, but not here for some reason. A bit strange considering that people clearly have been to the island before, as evident from the burnt-out campfire at the foot of the tree, and yet we hear nothing about it. That being said, this didn't stop Mekar Island from becoming a pretty big topic of discussion, especially in the early days when the game was still brand new. And for good reason, because despite its overall lack of rewards and story significance, it has quite a few mysterious attributes that make it stand out from any other location. The first indicator that something's off about this place is that if you try to reach the island by paraglider, you'll find that the wind is always blowing away from it, no matter the direction of your approach. Almost as if the island has a mind of its own and is actively trying to ward off potential visitors. Another strange aspect is that there's an unusually high amount of skeletons littered across the island. Not human bones, mind you, but the remains of what looks to be some kind of land-based animal, possibly a deer or a pig of some kind. While it is true that these types of remains can be found in other parts of Hyrule as well, the sheer number of them on Mekar Island is quite extraordinary, especially on such a small stretch of land. Not to mention that the ones you find in other places have a clear reason to be there. For example, they're often found close to enemy camps, and so most likely belong to animals the monsters hunt and kill. So, what are these bones doing here on a small deserted island? Why are there so many? And how did the animals even get here back when they were alive? Did they swim across? And of course, how did they die in the first place? I don't know, for some reason I get an elephant graveyard type of vibe from it. You know, a place where animals instinctively go when they're about to kick the bucket. Also of note is that the soil on the island is surprisingly dry and infertile, especially the closer you get to the tree, which is kinda odd considering the amount of rainfall this part of the map receives. By all accounts, this tree should be thriving, but clearly that's not the case. It's as if the very soil itself has been corrupted somehow, turning it into a place of death and decay. Something I also wanted to mention, and this could just be a coincidence, but I noticed while capturing footage that when the clock strikes exactly 12 PM, the tree's shadow will align perfectly with the campfire and the rock in front of it. And I mean perfectly, which kind of reminds me of one of those ancient sundials. Again, I have no idea if this was actually done on purpose, but I still thought it was worth pointing out. Anyway, if you ignore all the warning signs and decide to stay on the island until after sundown, you'll be met with the most sinister aspect of Mekar Island, and the main reason why so many people have talked about it over the years. When you set foot here during nighttime, a large group of stealth enemies will spring up from the ground and attack the player relentlessly. Now, of course, stealth enemies spawning at night is nothing special. It happens all over Hyrule from the highest peaks to the deepest valleys. However, the ones on the island are not your typical stealths. First of all, these guys do not respawn after you kill them, not until a blood moon occurs, which is not how stealths normally work. They keep showing up over and over until the sun comes up. Secondly, under normal circumstances, well, as normal as skeletons rising from the ground is in this universe, they tend to appear in groups of 2 or 3, and only consist of one enemy type at a time, so 3 bokoblins or 2 lizalfos, or 2 moblins, but not so on Mekar Island. Here it's a mix of 2 moblins, 3 lizalfos, and 4 bokoblins, all ganging up on you at once. What also sets these guys apart is that they brandish some pretty high-level gear, including ice and bomb arrows. This makes them exceptionally difficult to deal with, especially in the early to mid-game when you haven't upgraded your hearts and armor sets all that much. It's a perfect beginner's trap for unsuspecting players in that regard, and I'm pretty sure that that's exactly what the developers intended. The campfire is positioned in such a way that it can always be lit on fire, even when it's raining. This increases the odds that players who visit the island will eventually pass the time here, if only to stop the rain, or to see if something else will happen. And that's when they get ambushed by the undead army. Now, by the time the sequel was on the horizon, the discussion surrounding Mekar Island had mostly died down, though there were some, including myself, who theorized that it could play a bigger role this time, like maybe it would house a dungeon entrance or some other big secret. It was definitely on my list of things I wanted to check out as soon as possible, just to see if something had changed. However, sadly, this would prove not to be the case. In fact, the island is arguably even less significant here than it was in the previous game. There is a chest present this time, which wasn't there before, but all it holds is a decayed spear. Not exactly a mind-blowing reward. There's nothing in the skies above it, no quests or story significance once again, and unlike many other islands, it doesn't even have a counterpart in the depths. There's nothing below it whatsoever. The only difference worth mentioning is that instead of the nightly barrage of undead skeletons, the island is now home to one of the most notorious enemies in Tears of the Kingdom, the Gloom Spawn. However, defeating it doesn't yield anything special either. I've heard some people claim that it only appears after dark, just like the Stel enemies before, but from my own experience I can confirm that this is not true. It can appear at any time of day, though I do understand the confusion, because Gloom Spawns are not always guaranteed to show up. In fact, more often than not, it doesn't, which made capturing footage of this bastard quite the hassle. I'm not familiar with the way this enemy works on a technical level. All I know is that they do have predetermined spawn points and cannot just show up anywhere in Hyrule. In other words, the island was deliberately flagged to house a Gloom Spawn, but I have no idea what determines whether it shows up or not. It seems random to me, but who knows. Maybe the odds are higher at night. Anyway, that's Mekar Island in a nutshell. In the grand scheme of things, it's not really an important location by any means, but because of its unique traits, quite a few people became fascinated with it over the years, and have been trying to come up with ideas and backstories for the island and the phenomena that take place there. It's especially fun to read through old discussions from back when the game was still new, seeing people share their findings and trying out different things in hopes that they may find something significant, like a shrine or treasure. You can tell that a lot of people were confused back then and wondering what the heck was going on with this place. And it's also here that the first ideas about the island's purpose and the possible lore implications started pouring in. One of the earliest and most popular theories is that the island is a reference to the first Zelda on NES. More specifically, the location of the first dungeon, level 1, and it's easy to see why. It too is a rocky and barren island with a dead tree roughly in the middle of it. Furthermore, the tree on Mekar Island is surrounded by 4 withered saplings, which, according to the theory, represent the 4 smaller trees near the level 1 entrance. Zelda 1 was also one of the biggest inspirations for Breath of the Wild, and there are several callbacks to the NES classic as is, so it's not unreasonable to think that this too could be a nostalgic reference to an iconic location from that game. That being said, I myself am a bit skeptical that this is actually what they were going for. While they do have some superficial similarities, the 2 locations are also quite different. For example, there's no bridge connecting Mekar Island to the mainland, and the trees at their center, while both withered, don't look anything alike. In fact, if this was supposed to be a callback to the level 1 entrance, why didn't they use one of those creepy looking trees from the Lost Woods? You know, the ones with actual faces on them. You'd also expect that instead of 4 blue choo-choos, or in the case of Tears of the Kingdom, a Wizrobe, they would have instead placed a lone Octorok here to mimic the NES classic. Now, the 4 saplings are a little sus, I'll give you that, but even so, their position is nothing like the trees at level 1, so it could just be a coincidence. If this is a reference to the first Zelda, then it's a very obscure one, which is weird considering that the other callbacks to past games are so obvious and unmistakable, like the ruins of Lon Lon Ranch, the springs from Skyward Sword, or Spectacle Rock. With these, there is no doubt as to what they are referring to. Lastly, the idea of an island with a lone tree on it isn't even unique in the franchise, so who's to say that it's not a reference to something else, if it even is a reference to begin with. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents, and I could of course be totally wrong on this. Speaking of references, it's all but confirmed that the name Mekar is a callback to the character Mekar, the Sage of Wind from the Wind Waker, which is the case in both English and Japanese, by the way, so it's not a localization thing. Because of this fact, it's been suggested that the island could be a memorial, or possibly even a gravesite devoted to Link's old companion, and so the tree could be a grave marker or a headstone of sorts. It would explain the island's unusual ability to change the wind direction. Mekar was the Sage of Wind after all, so perhaps some of his essence or spirit still lingers here. There's no way to confirm any of this since we still don't know how the Switch titles fit into the timeline, if at all. And it's also worth mentioning that there are other sites named after past characters connected to the forest, like Mido and Saria, so it could just be a naming convention and nothing more. Still, it is an interesting theory for sure. Another idea I stumbled upon, which is actually a Japanese Zelda theory from 2021, is that the island's behavior could be connected to the same force that presides over the Lost Woods. Because you may have noticed that pretty much all the trees in the foggy parts of the forest are either dead or dying. So the idea is that whatever magic is twisting and warping the Lost Woods may extend beyond the border of the forest and is also affecting Mekar Island somehow. It's a compelling theory, though I do have a few issues with it. While the Lost Woods may look sinister, it's actually far from a cursed, dead-infested place. Quite the opposite, in fact. It's absolutely teeming with wildlife. Animals of all shapes and sizes call the forest home. There's no carcasses strewn about, no tainted soil. In fact, aside from the trees, the Lost Woods has a lot of plant life, and grassy fields as far as the eyes can see. The fog that shrouds the forest is also confirmed to be a product of the Deku Tree's magic, and serves as a barrier to keep Korok Forest and the Master Sword safe from evil, which doesn't really match with what we see on the island. If anything, monsters seem to be drawn to this place, not repelled by it. But again, that's just my observation, and maybe there is a correlation between the magic of the forest and the anomalies of the island. The final theory I want to address is a more recent one and was posted by @LazyKorok on Twitter. Yes, I'm still calling it Twitter, sue me. Anyway, it's actually the only theory I could find about the island that was made post Tears of the Kingdom, and so it includes knowledge that we didn't have back in 2017, particularly in regards to the Sky Islands. She suggests that the tree, and perhaps the island as a whole, actually originated from the sky, that perhaps long ago it came down to Earth and landed here, in Lake Mekar, a bit like how parts of the Great Plateau and the Great Sky Island once resided in the sky, and vice versa. The main evidence presented is that the tree has a few yellowish colored leaves left on it, which does look somewhat similar to the trees on the floating islands, all of which are yellow instead of green. This would mean that Mekar Island is not actually native to the area, and may explain why it feels a bit artificial and out of place. Now again, I do have to weigh all the options, so I do need to point out that the tree on Mekar Island is not actually unique by any means. There are several trees just like it all across Hyrule, right next to Death Mountain, inside Tobio's Hollow, and several inside the Lost Woods. And those are just the ones I was able to find during a quick search around. I'm sure there's even more of them out there. This would mean that either all of these trees originated from the sky, which I guess is possible, but also a bit unlikely, or what I think is the more logical option. The leaves are yellow because, well, it's a withered tree. Obviously, it's not going to have green leaves. It's also not as if the sky has a monopoly on yellow trees, as they do exist on the surface as well. That said, I do like the overall idea that the island was either man-made or was originally from somewhere else. At the very least, it could have been manipulated by human hands, or Zonai hands for that matter. So yeah, as you can see, there's no shortage of theories about Mekar Island. It's a mystery that's been discussed for many years, and while it may not be as popular a subject as, say, the Zonai or the 8th Heroine, it is something that people have wondered about. Which is why it's all the more frustrating that Nintendo has done absolutely nothing to expand on the mystery. No additional lore, no new clues to work with. We know about as much now as we did in 2017. That is to say, nothing. Nothing conclusive anyway. Of course, it's not uncommon for a Zelda mystery to remain unanswered after the credits roll, but Breath of the Wild's mysteries have been in a unique position in the sense that they had the potential to be solved or at least substantiated later on. Not only is it one of the few Zelda games to receive a direct sequel, it has the most additional content out of any game in the franchise by far. 2 DLCs, a sequel, 2 books, new voice memories, a spin-off. Heck, even as I'm making this video, we are due for yet another game that takes place in this version of Hyrule. Say safe to say they've had every opportunity to flesh out the mystery, and yet it continues to get overlooked time and time again. Neither of the two books mention Mekar Island in any capacity, or even show so much as a picture of it. In Age of Calamity, they didn't even bother to model the island properly, and as we know, Tears of the Kingdom barely did anything with it either. Like, imagine for a moment if the island had a hidden chasm, one that leads to a self-contained part of the underground similar to Rito Village. They could have included new lore down here about the island's history, maybe a tomb with an inscription alluding to Mekar, or something else that explains why the island acts the way it does. At the very least, they could have added a voice memory here in the Switch 2 versions. That would have taken minimal effort. But alas, that's not what happened. And after so many missed opportunities, I think we can safely say that Age of Imprisonment likely won't make a difference either. Which makes you wonder if there was ever even a mystery to begin with. That perhaps, as I stated previously, it was just a joke by the developers to trick unsuspecting players and nothing more. I mean, Zelda fans do have a tendency to create their own mysteries, even when the developers never actually intended there to be one. While that may very well be the case here, it's not surprising that some people have remained convinced that there is more to Mekar Island. The changing wind direction, the skeletons, the gloom spawn, the Stal enemies who behave differently from their counterparts, and other anomalies, it has all the ingredients for a good mystery. As far as the lore implications go, well, your guess is as good as mine. I've showcased a couple of ideas that have been put forth over the years, and again, we'll probably never know for sure what the deal is with this place. But if I had to make a guess, then I'd say that there's probably a curse or some kind of corruption involved. The soil on the island does remind me of the life-eradicating effects that malice has, especially on grass and other plant life. One idea I've been toying with is that before it got corrupted, the island could have been a sacred site like Satori Mountain, because the two locations do share a couple of interesting similarities. Both are connected to and named after a long-dead sage. Both have a bunch of animal bones present. In fact, animals in general seem to be drawn to this place, especially on nights when the Lord of the Mountain makes his appearance. Heck, both even feature an abandoned campsite, one whose owner seems to have taken off a long time ago. But perhaps most important, both feature a tree that seems to hold some kind of significance. In the case of Satori Mountain, a cherry blossom. It even has a similar shape as the tree on Mekar Island. We know from the Wind Waker that the Deku Tree, with the help of the Koroks, wants to spread the influence of the forest all across the kingdom. And there's even a new piece of lore in Masterworks that states that the Deku Tree and the cherry blossom on Satori Mountain could be considered the father tree and the mother tree. So perhaps the tree on Mekar Island is what's left of a previous attempt to grow one such mother tree, one that failed for unknown reasons. It's far from a perfect theory since I don't really have a lot of evidence to support it, but you know, that's Mekar Island for you. We simply don't have enough puzzle pieces to complete the full picture. At the end of the day, Mekar Island is just a quirky little place in a game filled with mysteries and unknowns, and it's definitely not something to lose your head over. But I do find it both funny and a little frustrating how Nintendo keeps ignoring this place altogether time and time again, especially considering that many other mysteries did end up getting some kind of resolution, or at the very least some additional lore to work with, either in the books or in the sequel. But as always, let me know what you think about it. Was it all just an inside joke on the side of the developers? A sneaky little trap for unsuspecting visitors and nothing more? Or do you still feel that there's something more than meets the eye here? Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching, thank you to my Patreons, members and Discord mods, and I hope you have a better day than this guy.